Ambassador Greer.
Say you.
Ambassador Greer, thank you. Did you like that last question? Yeah.
I was listening carefully.
Welcome. Join my show. Oops, excuse me.
Sure.
Join my show here. Everyone here, we have Jamieson Greer, who is a U.S. trade representative of the United States, engaged in countless numbers of trade deals, dealing with everything out there, and also critical material sales. He was also, I was talking about Robert Lighthizer earlier today. He was Bob Lighthizer's chief of staff during the first Trump administration, and he's one of the people I talked to that when I talked with Vince Haley just a little while ago about the highly technical dimensions of trade, the monitoring of markets. We also talked to Joe Lavorna about this. And so a lot of people give you credit for being one of the best trade technicians in the business. So thank you for joining us. Look, give us your map. I mean, give us what have you done? Which deals have you done today?
Today? Well, yeah. I just came from meeting with President Ruto of Kenya, who came to help be part of the peace deal with the DRC and Rwanda. And sign a health agreement with the United States. So they, in the first Trump term, we started trade agreement negotiations. In the Biden years, the ambition of that was highly reduced. They now are coming back and they want to have something. We're trying to pursue something called agreements on reciprocal trade. The last time we had what one would call a comprehensive free trade agreement in the United States really was the Korea-U.S. free trade agreement in 2011. Takes a long time to negotiate these things. They can be very contentious due to politics. We're trying to focus on agreements on reciprocal trade, which are very concrete, smaller versions that get market access for the United States overseas quickly and in a concrete way. And that's what we're trying to do with everybody, maybe with Kenya too.
Oh, so, as you're out there, is reciprocity the North Star? Is it the thing you're most worried about? Or are we being, kind of a la carte and looking, well, we need critical materials or rare earths here, or we, have agricultural exports that kind of hit, how much of this is an a la carte menu that's getting away from, it's really, thus everything is a new and special situation and we don't have a North Star in trade.
So I would say we're looking for balance, which I think presumes some reciprocity. When I say balance, I'm talking very specifically about our trade balance, and people get sick of hearing me talk about it. But the trade balance matters. If we have a deficit, if you're a multinational corporation, you don't necessarily care about imports and exports other than how it affects your bottom line. I understand that. We're capitalists. We believe in that. But if you are a worker, who is making vehicles in Ohio or HVAC equipment in Michigan or something like that, a trade deficit could represent, your job or your son's or daughter's potential job going somewhere else. So we care about trade deficits. So the deals we're looking for are deals where the United States is able to keep some level of protective tariff on the things that matter most, while also obtaining expanded market access overseas, and that leads to balance, right? We can export more, we can control the imports a little bit better, and that leads to balance. Now, all that being said, there are kind of adjacent issues that I call economic security. And if you look at our trade agreements we've concluded or the frameworks we've announced, they all have an economic security element to it. And it can include access to critical minerals investment opportunities. It can include aligning on export controls or on sanctions. It can include taking the similar measures to protect our economies in similar ways. And I think we have to view our economics through a national security lens as well.
So how do you, Jamieson, not fall into a trap of protecting the wrong jobs?
Well, what are the wrong jobs?
Well, I don't know. I would suppose you say you can, a lot of people where you could have jobs that maybe they've matured, they're low-end jobs, you've got other jobs that are going to drive greater value creation. I'm just sort of sitting and talking about criticisms of tariffs and that kind of trade policy. You end up, maybe protecting the wrong things.
Well, so first of all, what I would say is, and it kind of is embedded in your question of the wrong jobs. The right job for me is maybe not the right job for somebody else. I think the real trap that we fell into, really, post-Cold War, was saying, well, everyone should go to college and have a job that you can only have with a college degree, and we should tend towards services and emphasize that and get away from manufacturing. That's what I think what was wrong.
So we had kind of an industrial policy that took us there.
We had a default industrial policy, right? It was that anti-industrial policy, almost.
Okay.
So I think we need to protect industrial jobs. I think sometimes we hear, and people will say, oh yeah, semiconductor production, pharmaceuticals. I agree with all of that, but I think a lot of basic stuff, fertilizer production, chemicals, steel, aluminum, textiles, these are things where people might say these are the wrong jobs. They're not. We need these things. We found out during the pandemic, you have to have textiles, you have to have medical equipment. I was in the military, I wore a uniform, that's made of textiles. All of our vehicles, all of our equipment, they have textiles. I just use that as an example. So I think that we want to make sure we are protecting as much as we can, understanding we're not going to make everything here. So we want to make sure that we can also have good supply chains as close to home as possible.
What's been remarkable about the work you've done and the period we're in is the kind of reclassification of economic. Because 30 years ago, I was arguing it was a national security issue, but nobody listened. Right? Nobody. I mean, you and I are.
Bob agreed with you.
But yeah, Bob. Yeah, I worked with your former boss 30 years ago, Bob Lighthizer, and we both look back and say, damn, if we'd been effective, if everybody listened to us then, we wouldn't be in the mess we are in now. But it has really shifted where you're right. The national security frame has become a very substantial part of it. You would never imagine a U.S. trade representative at National Security Council meetings, and others like you're doing that. How have other countries either rejected that or mimicked it?
So first of all, we have seen mimicking, and part of it is out of need. A good example are the tariffs we've put in place on steel, where there's huge overcapacity in the world, certainly in China, but also in India, other places in Asia. So we've had tariffs on steel for some time, since the first Trump administration. The Biden people kept it. President Trump has tightened it again. We have seen over the past several months, Canada, Mexico, the EU, many countries raise their own tariffs on steel, particularly against the biggest offenders. And people have been saying, listen, I may have free trade agreements, I may have other things happening, but I'm going to have to protect myself. And so we are seeing other countries mimic some of this. I will say one of the most significant things that happened this year is at the Turnberry Resort in Scotland, where we concluded a framework deal with the EU. We were sitting in a room with Ursula von der Leyen, President of the EU, and President Trump, and they were finalizing the negotiation of this framework deal. And President von der Leyen, she said, we understand there are global imbalances that need to be fixed. And to me, because I'm like a trade nerd, that was a real turning point, I thought. Because normally what we hear from the EU is deficits don't matter, let's just have rules, and we'll follow them wherever they lead, regardless of the outcome. That's not how we operate, right? Our view is you have to figure out what's the outcome you want and then develop a trade policy to reach it. And if our outcome is we need more manufacturing, we need secure supply chains, you're going to have a different trade policy.
I love that you call yourself a trade nerd.
You are too. You are too.
I know I'm right? Deep down. How is it going with China?
How is it going with China? Well, China is a challenge.
Of course.
They have a different system than we do. And for decades, again, following the end of the Cold War and leading up to China's accession to the World Trade Organization, there was what I think a total misunderstanding, either deliberate or not, by U.S. policymakers that China would change, that China would essentially get to a spot where they would swear on their mother's grave, I'm not going to be communist anymore, I'm not going to be state-centered, I'm not.
Well, they weren't supposed to succeed unless they looked like us, right?
Exactly right. And guess what? They have a different system, and I'm not really in the business of going to China and saying you have to change everything. Like, I don't think that's the best use of my time as U.S. trade representative. My view is the landing zone with China is our trade with them needs to be more balanced. It needs to probably be smaller so we're not so dependent on each other, and it needs to be in areas of non-sensitive goods. That's where I think where we need to be going. And you can kind of see it evolving, right, in terms of...
What are your measures of success?
With China?
Yeah.
Well, balance, first of all. So if you look from the beginning of the year, our trade deficit in goods with China specifically is down, about 25%. So to me, that's the right direction. People will come and say, oh, well, they're sending it through other places, or Chinese content is getting in. I acknowledge that, but we're still in a better situation now than we were in January. So that's part of it. Part of it also is having stability, right? I mean, I don't think anyone wants to have a full-on economic conflict with China, and we are not having that. In fact, President Trump has had the opportunity to use all leverage we have against China, and we have a lot, right? Whether it comes to software or semiconductors or all kinds of things. a lot of allies who are interested in taking coordinated action. But the decision right now is we want to have stability in this relationship. We have to get our own house in order. We need to make sure that we are on a good path to reindustrialization, including for critical minerals. So for this moment in time, we want to make sure that China is buying the kinds of things from us we should be selling them, aircraft, chemicals, and medical devices, and agricultural products. We can buy things from them that are non-sensitive, consumer goods, low-end electronics, et cetera. Whenever you get to the higher end technologies, that's always, what do you control, what do you not, right? That's always a conversation to be had. But I think we're in a stable situation with China, and we're monitoring it. We're watching it evolve literally on a daily basis.
I interviewed President Paul Kagame of Rwanda yesterday, and he's here for the big agreement signing. And he talked a little bit about the economic framework and agreement around a lot of the critical materials and processing. He said the United States helped set up all this stuff. And I said, what is making this work? You're talking so positively about President Trump. And he says, he doesn't talk to us about all these kind of meta topics, democracy and human rights, blah, blah, blah. He's a transactionalist. Are you his transactionalist?
I'm one of them. I think we all are. But it's an interesting point. And President Trump, people talk about this meeting he had with Mamdani in the Oval Office, and everyone's like, "Oh, I can't believe this went well." I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, the reality is the president is very good at identifying common interests and points of divergence, but identifying common interests regardless of where someone fits on an ideological scale, and reaching out for that and trying to find an area where they agree. So, I mean, you can call it transactional, which is true, but has a little bit of a negative connotation. I really think it's more of finding common interests in a very quick manner.
So you helped negotiate the USMCA, right? Remember that?
Yeah, I remember
First
that.
time.
Yeah.
And so you're now helping whatever happens to USMCA. Is USMCA going to continue, or is it just going to become US without the M and the CA?
Well, I mean, listen, Congress passed it, right? It's in law right now. Canada and Mexico are our largest export destinations. Our supply chains run largely through these countries. There are problems with USMCA. Our expectation is that there would be a lot more auto production in the U.S., and we did see a lot more auto investment in the U.S. and companies that came and built. We've also saw that Mexico really took advantage of it, and a lot of imports of vehicles from Mexico continued. We've now imposed a Section 232 tariff on autos from all over the world. That includes Canada and Mexico. So some of these challenges with USMCA, we already have adjustments in place to control for that. I want to make sure that Canada and Mexico aren't used as an export hub for Vietnam or China or Indonesia or something like that.
Is that happening? I mean, do we have national security risk in Mexico because of Chinese investment?
Yes. That being said, the Mexicans have their own interest in managing this. The Mexicans want to make sure that USMCA is good for them and that they're the ones benefiting from it. They have a lot of workers. They want to make sure that they're not the victims of overcapacity coming from Asia. I mean, we talk about China, but there's a lot of Asian overcapacity, Vietnam, et cetera. There is a lot of common interest in making sure that if we have that agreement, if it endures, that it truly is for the benefit of these countries.
I've spent time with you and some of your former colleagues that were in the first round of the Trump administration. And something I think journalism really failed in is telling the story of the kind of finely tuned machinery and analysis your team did around market share and watching U.S. industry impacts and how tariffs were put in. And I mean, I got goosebumps listening to all this trade stuff one night on what was going on. And I think the American public, and I think many people in business may not have known, a lot of interaction with business at the time, but I think it's a very, very important part of the story about the smoothness, if you will, of the first Trump administration in some of this and how it sort of worked. Is that in place now again?
Sure it is, right? I mean, remember though, in the first Trump administration, we were trying to fix NAFTA, we were trying to get the China relationship under control, and we did both of those. Although they were large projects, they were fairly discrete. President Trump has now tried to take on the largest project of dealing with our large and persistent trade deficit, which exploded by 40% over the Biden years. And so that requires a global tariff. It requires a larger tariff on the larger offenders. So it's a broader project. People will always ask, well, where's your data? Where's your analysis? And I say, look at the trade deficit. It's public. You can see how it moves. We dig into it as we go country by country. we take a look at what's driving it and how it can be changed. And so we've had a lot of conversation with these countries specifically on how they can address the trade deficit. And it's product specific, it's sector specific. Some of it is responsive to changes in trade rules. Some of it have other factors that aren't necessarily trade related, but it is a detailed analysis, and we have an entire agency, and we leverage the rest of the agencies too to help us undertake all those analyses.
Well, look, I'm thrilled you took time out of your day to come talk to us. We've got Senator Mark Warner coming up, right here. We're going to see him. You can, I will see how
we were hanging out yesterday in the Senate.
Oh, really?
Well, hanging out.
Was it friendly?
I'd say it was friendly.
Yeah, friendly? Okay, good. Well, we're going to have a repeat. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Jamieson Greer, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to see you.